Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gemini Rising. Can you guys hear music playing? Okay, there we go.
I don't hear it.
No. Oh, do you know what it is? Okay, this sums up the day. As I'm getting into all of this, my YouTube channel was playing on the computer. So let me start this again. Welcome everybody to Gemini Rising after our little hiatus while I was traveling with family. We're so excited to be back, and we're so excited about our guest today. Brianna Ladapo is an author, a light worker, a mum, and just one of my favorite humans. And if you haven't seen any of my previous interviews with Brianna, she is the author of Emerging from Darkness. And we are so happy to have you here, Brianna. And of course, my co-host, Dr. Anne Woolke. I'm so sorry, Anne.
That's all right. Hello. I think this is an appropriately Gemini Rising introduction.
Do you mean messy?
Just all over the place and fun, right?
It sums up energetically the morning that we've all been having. And you were going through it this morning time-wise. I'm clearly having technical difficulties, and Brianna, you've got a surprise guest at your house working away. I feel like that intro does just sum up where we all are at this moment in time. How are you both?
I'm amazing, other than I like being completely unpredictable lately, but I'm sure there must be a reason. But it's so wonderful to see both of you. I missed you.
It's great to see you also. And I'm having a great morning. It's been like a little, kind of like a kiddie roller coaster or like just little things jumping out and you have to navigate your way around it. I don't know. I kept getting blocked on the road today by mail trucks. I don't know what that signifies, but I was talking to Natalie or leaving a message where a mail truck was there, I think. Then I went around the road and there was another one pulling out, and then a third one as I got into my own neighborhood. So maybe messages are on their way for me. I don't know.
That was going to be my question. Are you not listening to a message that's coming through?
Oh, maybe.
Experience with garbage trucks 3 days ago. So I don't know if I want to ponder what that message is.
Maybe there's some trash you need to take out.
Natalie, okay, this is this show. Natalie will now just analyze all of our synchronicities. So Brianna, trash that needs to be taken out. Me, messages I must listen to. Okay.
I kind of feel, I mean, we talked about it being the perfect entry into the conversation that we're going to have. So for those people that haven't read Emerging from Darkness, you need to, because it's such a beautiful book and it's so well written, and it gives you a bit of a sense of Brianna's history and who she is and the gifts that she has. But it kind of leads to the conversation that we were wanting to have today, because we've done an episode of The Golden Thread where we talk specifically about the book and the experiences that you've talked about in there. But I think for me, I wanted to learn more about the gifts that you have. At what age you realized you had them, and with the clairs, I guess, how many of the clairs you have.
As far as when I realized it, I was born doing the things that I can do. I never knew any different. And I didn't know it was strange until I started sharing it with my family. From the time I was little, as far back as I can remember, I would see my angels in the room with me. I would talk to them. I always had, whenever I met someone or was in the presence of somebody new, I would be able to read their energy and often see it in color, like a colorful aura around them. And I would know essentially everything I needed to know about the person. Was it a safe person? Were they pure-hearted and well-meaning or not? And I would often share these observations and feelings with my family. But my family, as you ladies know, was extremely religious. And so these things did not exist in their lives. They didn't believe in it, and they assumed that it must be demonic. They truly thought it was satanic. So the feedback I was getting was really negative. But for me, it was the only experience I'd ever had. And until I started hearing about how evil it was, I assumed everyone could do it. And honestly, I spent years wondering, well, if people can't read other people, how do they know who to be in relationships with, who to work with, who is safe to be near? So for me, it's always been a part of me. Now, I did shut it down for a good 20 years. And we've had part of that conversation before. It just was not safe to have these gifts in the family that I grew up in. And at some point, I got tired of suffering. I got tired of constantly having to defend my experience. And so I did my best to shut it all down. And I really oppressed it for probably a good 20 years. And then after my experiences in Egypt and meeting my husband and just a series of other really remarkable events that essentially blew the lid off the pot that I had created for myself, they all came screaming back. But at first, I had no control over it. And frankly, I didn't know that I could. So I don't remember whether I shared this story previously, but when my gifts first came back online very strongly, I was having a lot of really horrific visions, really dark things, serial killings, airplanes exploding, awful things. And at first I thought / hoped they were dreams, but they weren't. Every single one of them came true. And I never had any advance indication about, where this was going to happen. And I felt like I was being given this information, but I couldn't do anything with it. So I got really depressed for a while, as it seemed like everything that was coming through was dark and I couldn't understand the purpose. And then one day I was sharing this with a friend of mine. I was at the end of my rope, and he said, you can turn that off, right? I was like, no, please help me. And he gave me the simplest visualization. In fact, I'll share in case it might help somebody else. He said, okay, close your eyes and picture 2 faucets. I said, okay. He said, one of them is all things darkness. It's fear and hatred and anger and oppression. He said, and the other one is all things light, divine love, community, acceptance, gratitude, etc. He said, okay, you picturing them? I said, yeah. He said, okay, turn the dark one off. I said, that's it. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, make sure the other one is completely open and turn the dark one off. And I did it, but I was thinking to myself, there's no way that's all there is to it. But sure enough, that was the last time I ever had a dark vision. They stopped. And from then on, it was all light. But more important than that was me learning that I could actually set boundaries and have some control of the process, because I really didn't know that. I feel like there's a huge part of your question that I left out. Forgive me.
So which of the 5 clairs do you have? So we've got obviously clairvoyance, claircognizance, clairsentience. I'm missing 2.
Clairaudience and clair. What's the other one? I can't think. We should have been more prepared for this. Clair knowing. Is that claircognizance? Did you say that already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's another Claire. So anyway, which do you have?
I actually never even knew the names for them until fairly recently. It's just been in the last handful of years that I learned these were even named phenomena. So most definitely, what was the clair knowing?
Claircognizance.
Yes. So definitely that. I've always had that. And excuse me, clairvoyance to an extent. For me, they seem to go together. Since I was little, I have had visions. For many years, I thought they were just dreams. But I began to notice after a while that the ones that came true had a very different quality. So whereas when I would dream and wake up, the dream would start to slip away pretty quickly. Often it would be fantastical. It would just have a more ethereal, less grounded quality. But the visions I would remember with perfect clarity. In fact, I still remember most of them to this day. And it felt more like a memory than a dream. And so I came to be able to recognize those as visions. And sure enough, every single one of them came true. Some within 24 hours, with some it took decades. But every single one of them has come to pass. And that has interesting implications for the future, because now I'm having some pretty heavy and intense visions about the future that I fully expect to unfold eventually. Let's see. So I had never experienced clairaudience until I had my youngest son. So my baby boy, who's now 5, his name is Max, and he was born right before Thanksgiving. And that's only important because since it was the holiday season, he and I would stay home and basically snuggle all day and put up Christmas lights and do very little when I was recovering from giving birth, while my husband would be at work and my 2 older boys were in pre-K and first grade. So little Max and I we would create this beautiful space around the Christmas tree, and we really just snuggled and did a lot of skin to skin for a solid month after he was born. And so that's how we used to sit. Particularly during the day, it was very, very quiet in that community. And I noticed a few days after I brought him home, I started hearing conversations, bizarre conversations that sounded like they were taking place decades ago. And it literally sounded like they were right next to me, but there was no one home. And I would always get up and look out the window and see if there were people around, but there never were. And it started to happen more and more. And then I started hearing multiple conversations at the same time, all around me. And these conversations were clearly between people who had lived long before I was born. And so I consulted a friend of mine because I didn't know what to make of it. And he said, it's Max. It's his gift. But because of the incredible bond you share and how recently you gave birth to him, you're getting to experience it as well. And sure enough, this went on for almost a year. And when he started to become a little less of a newborn and a little bit more alert and involved in the world, he started to be able to really move his head and move his hands and point his fingers. I would see him turn his little face and gesture at where these conversations were coming from. So I took that as confirmation that he did indeed hear them. And then right about the time he started to talk, I couldn't hear him anymore. It disappeared. So something shifted. So that was definitely his gift, but I got to borrow it for a little while. So that was fun. What are the other ones? Forgive me.
So there's claircognizance, which is the knowing. Clairsentience, which is the sense, I believe. I've brought everything up. So clear feeling. So that's when you feel sensations in your body that match something going on in your life. Clairaudience, which you've just talked about. Clairvoyance, clear seeing what is happening in your third eye. And then this other one, I don't know that I've heard this term before. Clairalience, which means clear smelling.
Oh, I actually do have that. That one I've had since I was little. That used to confuse me. I would constantly smell things that were nowhere around but connected to whatever I was thinking about. In fact, just the other day, I was in the kitchen thinking about my great-grandpa who passed many years ago, but he used to smoke a pipe. And while I detest the smell of cigarette smoke, I love the smell of pipe smoke because it reminds me of my great-grandpa. And as soon as I started thinking about him, I smelled the pipe like he was right in the room with me. And it happened the other day. I was at the beach with my boys, and we were way out in the middle of the ocean. And we were talking about my garden. My sweet babies, they're as attuned to plants and animals as I am. So they get in there in the dirt. They love to help me. We were talking about my garden and whether we should plant roses. And I was overwhelmed by the scent of roses right in the middle of the ocean. But the best part was one of my sons was too. So he must share that gift. I feel like I'm missing one. I think I've experienced all of them except the clairaudience is that was just I rented it. So I don't have
clairvoyance also, right? The visions, or
yeah.
Does that happen to you mostly in sleep or?
Mostly, but not exclusively. And it seems like the longer I'm on this path and the more work I do to raise my vibration, the more I'm able to access those gifts in my conscious state. So it's still mostly sleep, but more and more I'm getting things during the day when I'm awake. And I am actively asking my guides to feel free to share things with me in any state of consciousness that I can receive them. So I've been playing with that a little bit. Every week, at least once a week, I take a very specific meditation bath with the intention of opening up my channels, connecting with my guides and my angels and my archangels. And I've noticed that every week now, without fail, I have at least one incredible vision and experience of connecting with them. A couple of weeks ago, I opened my eyes and one of them was in the bath with me, right in front of me, which is very interesting. That had never happened before. So my connection is definitely getting stronger. Although the trick is these days, at least for me, the amount of noise interference and the desperation of the darkness is also getting louder. So I'm having to work ever harder to block all of that out and really stay in alignment so that I can receive the messages, because clearly there are many entities who do not want me receiving those messages. I don't know if you ladies are having a similar experience.
Well,
right
what's
now.
interesting is I had to mute because we never have gardeners around on Fridays, but there's someone with a leaf blower outside right now. and it's so funny because as you were talking, and I'm sitting here thinking, what about noise? And you start answering that. And then before that, I was thinking, well, how do you know the difference between whether it's a vision or a dream? And you answered that. So I'm just going to sit here and keep thinking. I'm just going to keep thinking the questions. But on that note, so I was trying to remember, I think you're a Pisces, right? Or
No, I'm actually an Aries.
Aries, that's right. What's your rising sign?
I don't know. Natalie,
Oh my gosh. She must be a Gemini rising, so she'll just be one for today.
Have you ever sent me your time of birth?
I think it was 2:45 a.m. on April 16th. I know shockingly little about astrology. I'd love to learn more though.
Okay, so you can text me this if you don't want to say it on air, but what year and what town were you born in?
Oh, I'm happy to say it. 1981, and I was born in Whittier, California. So I have to tell you a really quick, funny story while you're looking it up. So for Mother's Day the other day, my little one in class made one of those charts where they have to answer questions about their mom. And the very first question they asked him to answer was, "How old is your mom?" Which, by the way, is not a kind thing to ask about a lady. But I've trained them so well. He said, "My mom is ageless. That's not a polite question."
That is so sweet. I love it. It's so funny because my son also, he for some reason got the message, because I have a friend who every year she knew, okay, when I have small children, they're just going to blab out my age, right, on the birthdays because it's exciting for them. So she just started telling them, okay, I'm turning 28 this year. And they were just telling everybody she's 28, So every year she'd start going up. But my son kind of got it, I think, from that. And he just stopped telling people after I turned 40. He wouldn't tell anybody. So good training. All right. Does Natalie have an answer?
I almost have an answer. 1 second.
So, yeah, maybe we should wait for that, huh? She's almost there.
Okay. Here we go. So rising, Aquarius rising.
Oh, wow.
I have no idea what that means.
So it's an air rising. Anne is better at explaining the astrology than I am. So Anne, do you want me to send you this chart?
Sure, you can text it, or
yeah.
I've got everything open. I'm looking with all my devices, but yeah. Gosh, there's another louder truck coming by. But what's her moon?
Her moon is it's Libra.
Oh, perfect. I have a Libra moon
Virgo.
too. Well, that's good too. So she's an Aries with a Virgo moon and an Aquarius rising. So that means she's a 7th house. Or no, she's, what is that? An 8th house moon?
Hang on. It is 7th house. Hang on. I'm going to send this to you right now. I just took a screenshot, so I'm just cropping it.
Well, I'm not the astrologer amongst the people that we know. But I will say that the Aries or Aquarius rising to me seems appropriate for as tuned in as you are into this like alien world that most of us don't connect to, and that you're so able to communicate it as well, and through the book as well. When I read your book, and this was something that I wanted us to talk about so that other people can think about the way to unfold these gifts in themselves, because I think a lot of people have a similar experience to you where they grew up in a restrictive home, in which they learned either from their home or from their friends that they learned to suppress those gifts, or they learned to suppress the senses that they had. Or you just assume everybody else has them and you never really think about it being bad. And it's like the way that you described the experience of kind of just accepting it, knowing that that's how you were, but then you learn all of a sudden that's a bad thing and it could be evil, right? You do such a good job explaining how you went through that process that I think it's one of the biggest gifts of your book is to help people understand what it feels like to go through it. And I think that's partly also, to me, a Virgo moon would be being able to take the feelings and make it concrete, so, and emotions, so people now know what it's like. It makes you such a good teacher through just giving your story. So what would you tell people who might be in that place of knowing that they have empathic gifts, but they're feeling maybe they're feeling a little crazy. That's the thing, right? People feel like, do I really have that gift, or am I crazy? Is this a real message I'm getting? How can people learn to trust that voice in themselves and to learn whether it's your mind over functioning, or is this actually some sort of empathic or intuitive knowledge?
It's such a good question. And I struggled for a long time because I think our first instinct, especially if we grew up in an environment that was not accepting of our gifts, is to doubt. Like I must be crazy. Maybe I watched something weird. Maybe I ate something. Something's happening. But for me, from my perspective, the most important thing that people can do to determine what's really going on and if those messages are real is to get into a place, find their peace. They really need to find a space where they can be silent and still and actually hear that voice, because our intuition is so powerful. It's our guiding light. We actually all know everything we need to know at a soul level. It's always there. That wisdom is ever present, and it always was. But we live in a world with so much noise, right? So much distraction. It's constant, whether it's um, the news and all the darkness there, whether it's social media and all the chatter and distraction and negativity there. Even our food, air, and water, right, are unclean and full of things our body has to work overtime to process out. It's a very toxic existence right now on this planet. And all of that is designed to distance us from our souls, to take us out of alignment so we cannot hear that voice. Because if we hear that voice, and we inherently understand the truth about who we are and what we need, then we can't be manipulated. And that would make us very dangerous indeed to the powers that be, who have a very vested interest in keeping us afraid and living in fight or flight and ultra responsive to these fear-based tactics of manipulation. So, though it sounds simple, far and away the most important thing to do is meditate, even if it's 2 minutes a day. Because I know for some people that's a lot to ask. They hear the word meditate and think, ugh, either that's hippie stuff, or it's not real, or I don't have time for that, or I can't turn my brain off. And I know this because I said all the same things. But the truth is, the only way to get through it is just to do it. So even if all you can do, we'll take it down to 1 minute even. go outside or in the bathtub. For me, water is really important. I prefer the ocean because the incredible energy of the ocean really supports my gifts and helps me do what I do. It helps me heal. So I do best on the beach or quite literally in the water. I take saltwater baths to help mimic those effects if for some reason I can't be in the ocean. But for some people, it's mountains or trees or more of a woodsy environment. So whatever it is that really calls to you, or it's just your garden, just go outside and get your feet in the dirt. And for 1 minute, just close your eyes and be still. And it used to drive me crazy when people would say, clear your mind. The second you tell me to clear my mind, I'm going to think about every single thing that has ever floated into my existence. I cannot clear my mind on demand, or at least I couldn't when I started. So don't worry about that. For me, it's just about being quiet and being in the moment. You can think about anything you want, but just be in the moment and be there with the intention of hearing the messages that your soul's trying to share with you. Because the other thing that I think results from the world that we're living in is people feel really isolated. And now even physically isolated, right, on the heels of COVID and actual lockdowns, but they felt spiritually isolated before that. And isolation, it certainly doesn't serve humanity. In fact, it's quite torturous, right? We're not designed to be isolated. We're social creatures. We're creative creatures. We're supposed to live in communities and help and support each other. So that isolation is really damaging. Excuse me. Oh, gracious. I don't remember where I was going with that. I'm sorry. Does anyone remember?
You were talking about the ability to meditate and how we're all separated at the moment, isolated spiritually. And I mean, the last few years, we have been purposely isolated physically as well as spiritually.
Yeah, thank you so much. I knew I was going somewhere. What I was going to say is that as isolated as one might feel, I want everyone to remember that they are constantly in community. We all have angels. Just because I happen to be able to see and talk to mine doesn't mean I'm the only one who has them. I firmly believe, in fact, I am quite certain we all have other souls supporting us, some seen, some unseen. We all have a team. We're all here for a reason. So as alone as you may feel, it's never the truth. And I found in my practice that anytime I ask them to show up for me and say, look, I am not feeling well. As I'm shaking my faith, I'm having a tough time, and I need a sign. I need you to show up for me. They always do. And so that might sound crazy to someone who is either new to this world or has never established that relationship with their guides, but you can do it. I tell so many of my clients, if you are at the beginning of that journey, before you go to sleep at night, just ask your guides to be in connection with you, invite them to show up in a dream, invite them, or really wherever you're comfortable, but just invite them to support you in some way. And I promise you that will come to pass. Sometimes it takes a little time. From my experience, I think it really just took a little time for me to understand that it was happening, not necessarily for the guide to show up, but it took me a little while to be able to see and hear and communicate and feel it. But that is available to all of us. And it's so important to be able to ask those sources. And one of our guides is always our higher self, right? So really you're tapping into your own divine wisdom. And in a world where everybody has an opinion about who you should be, what you should do, what you should believe, it's imperative to be able to really go inward and ask yourself, tap into that innate knowing. Because if you know who you really are at a soul level, you know that your gifts are real and you know you can rely on source, you will not be able to be manipulated by these narratives that are constantly being pushed at us.
I think there are so many directions I want to go in this with this. So the whole thing you were saying about being in the ocean, that has always been my greatest reset, to the point that sometimes I would go to the beach, and even if I didn't want to be in the water the whole time, I would, as soon as I got there, I would drop all my things, go and dive under a wave and come out feeling like a new person. That's always my go-to. And I find on days where I don't have it in me to sit and meditate quietly in my home somewhere, I do it in my shower. So I don't do it in the bath because I don't have a tub that I can actually soak in, but I will stand, and if I can, I'll put my face under the water or my head under the water and let it all run down. I get my best downloads in the shower because I think the flow of the water as it's clearing all of the energy, and my light does this when I'm onto something, but as all of the energy that I'm trying to clear is literally going down the drain and my mind is still, I come out of that shower and I have to call people. Anne forever gets messages where I tell her I'm straight out of the shower because she needs to know. But that's where all the things come from. And I think the whole thing about meditation is the greatest thing that someone can do for themselves because it reconnects them to the earth. It reconnects them to their guides, their higher self, everything like that. I want to hear what Anne has to say about your chart. Did you have a look at it?
Oh, I did. I just looked briefly at it and I thought, I can't do it justice. I'm not there yet. I noticed, I don't know. I was looking at her nodes and I just am thinking, oh, interesting. She's got Neptune in the 10th house, for example. And so to me, that's, her public life is the spirituality, right? And I was looking at her north node in the 6th house, which is a Virgo, the Virgo energy house. So, and it's to do with daily work and, but it's in Leo. So I feel that she's doing, and also, let me see, I think it aspects her, well, kind of her Neptune. So, I always like to look at what is someone's mission, and I definitely feel that she's on her path. She learned so much about spirituality through her daily existence and as a child growing up. That to me seems like that was part of what was in your destiny to get you to the point where you could share this with the wider world. So, and I don't know. I'd have to spend a lot more time looking at it. I'm not an expert yet.
Well, we'll do that at a later date because I've saved the chart so we can go back and revisit it. So
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One being, so we went on a trip recently and I treated you like you were a circus monkey and I was poking you going, do this, do this, do this. But I'm assuming it ties back into your ability to see somebody's aura. But I discovered on the trip that you can look at a photo and really read that person. And one of the interesting things to me was if there's energy that you don't like, you see the same face. Because we were talking about a few people and you said to me, it's the same person. And I had to say, no, it's not. They're two different people. And you explained to me that when you see that sort of energy coming through, they appear the same way to you. Is that just reading their aura or is it something deeper than that?
That's a great question. And honestly, I'm still figuring it out. So I've always been really good at reading people in person, but the photo gift, that only started about maybe 10 years ago, where I started to notice that I was really picking up strong, clear energy from a photo of strangers. And so I started practicing, and it's definitely gotten startlingly accurate. So I'm still exploring what is behind it, but it is very true that when I see or feel a certain type of energy, especially if, like you said, if it's something I don't like, if it's dark, what happens is, but sometimes it's hard to explain things in earth terms. I know how it feels and I'm trying to bring it into language. So what happens is someone's energy, particularly if I find it destructive, it will remind me of some sort of like a dark, not always demonic, but some sort of dark frequency experience I've had in the past. And very often it's a past life. Sometimes it will bring up a memory I've never even had before, at least not consciously. So what keeps happening to me, in fact, it happened this morning with someone that my husband was interacting with. I'll see someone for presumably the first time, at least here, but I'll recognize their energetic signature. And I don't know if it's because I've encountered that actual soul before, or if that signature is merely representative of something else that I have had to deal with in the past that I'm either being invited to resolve, or if it's triggering my noticing a pattern for some reason. But it just happened today. My husband showed me a photo of someone, and I had a strong reaction, and it immediately reminded me of someone else that I encountered 20 years ago and haven't thought about since. And it turned out they actually did have a strong connection in real life that I didn't know about. So I'm not sure yet. I'm working on that one. I don't know.
I so enjoy that gift because, like I said, on the trip, once I figured out that this was a thing, I presented every single man that has ever been in my life to you with no information and just went, tell me about this one, tell me about this one. And it was fascinating to get your take on it, because for some of them, it was so incredibly accurate. And with others, it's not that it wasn't accurate. It was a different perspective from my experience. But that's the whole thing, right? Just because sometimes people do bad things, it doesn't make them a bad person. So really, really fascinating. But the other thing I wanted to touch on, everyone talks a lot about being an empath, and there are people that you say, you know, I'm an empath, I'm this, I'm that. And I think there are a lot of empaths around. I know that I am one, but one of the theories that I keep hearing is if you've had a traumatic childhood, that makes you become an empath because you need to be aware of the energies in the room. And you talk about in your book the childhood you had growing up. I certainly had very difficult experiences growing up with my family, and I was recently traveling with my family. It's why the show's been on hiatus for the last 5 weeks. And traveling with them, while it was a wonderful thing when you're with family for 5 weeks without a break and you're sharing rooms with people, all of that, it's a lot, right? It's not to say anything about them or their energy. It's just, it's a lot because you don't have that opportunity to walk away and be in your own space. But we were playing cards, and this is such an innocuous sort of little thing. But while I was sitting there, we were playing cards, and my sister and my father are very similar. And when they're very competitive, and when they lose, they get very upset, and the whole energy shifts. And I talk a lot, and I talk crap when I'm playing cards with my family. I want to talk smack. I want to tell them how much I'm going to beat them. And I get frustrated when I'm not getting what I want. But ultimately, I don't care if I win or lose. But when they would get upset, I would feel, again, being an empath, you feel their emotions, you feel the tension, you feel the shift in the room. And it made me think that this theory that if you have a traumatic childhood, that creates someone to be an empath. And I actually disagree. And I'm curious as to both your thoughts on this theory. I think to grow up in a space that is difficult, you do learn how to read a room. So you become emotionally intelligent because you can read what mood somebody is in. You can read what is going on and who that person is, whether it's an angry energy, whether it's a loving energy, whether it's light, dark, however you want to describe it. But I think being an empath is something completely different, because it's one thing to be able to read the room, and emotional intelligence isn't that common, unfortunately, at this moment in time. But I think being an empath is something completely different, because to actually feel those emotions versus being able to recognize them, to me, is something different. My sister is an incredible healer. She is just mind-blowingly amazing. But I don't believe she has that empathic ability, and it's not to say she's not an empath, but at the level that I do. And I don't think it's to do with the childhood trauma. I think it has everything to do with, this is something I was born with, and that's something I've been able to do since I was a child. And I'm curious as to your thoughts.
So my position on this has actually shifted a bit in the past maybe 5-10 years. It's a bit of a chicken or egg situation. First of all, I agree with you about it being emotional intelligence that is gained when a child grows up in any kind of adverse situation, because it's a survival mechanism, right? You adapt, you observe, and you learn how to survive. And that was definitely true for me. I became an expert people pleaser for a long time. And I was always very empathic. I'll say always, always. And I used to think they were the same thing. I have that water bottle. I love it. It's so pretty. So then when I started really getting into the work of transmuting trauma and stripping things away, I realized I was able to finally see the difference between the qualities that I had sort of tried on for size to survive versus the qualities that were actually inherent to my soul. And so, yes, I certainly am an empath, and there are many things that I simply came in armed with. I think I chose to come in with certain qualities, knowing that I was a healer and intended to be a healer in this lifetime and to be of service in a particular way. However, the part that shifted for me is ever since I started doing the work of transmutation, and I mentioned Christopher before. This is the amazing healer that has helped and taught me so much and really helped introduce me to my actual self. He's helped me strip away trauma and learn how to continue stripping away trauma, so I keep stepping more and more fully into who I truly am at a soul level. And as I've done this for myself, and as I've observed others do it, and some who were starting from the perspective of things you'd find in the DSM-5, like psychopathy, bipolar disorder, but what we would consider very serious mental illness, I have seen people remove the layers of trauma that were creating that persona and transform from the farthest thing from an empath. In fact, things that would prey on empaths, right? Narcissists, things that we talk about in books, into an empath. So it's made me wonder, well, many, many things. I've spent days and weeks and months thinking about this, but I've come to believe that all humans actually have the capacity at some level for these empathic gifts. But for most, first of all, there's too much turbulence in the way. There's too much noise, like we were talking about earlier, to ever be able to tap in and use them. There's just too much pain in the way. And it's certainly not supported, right? Getting through this life on this planet at this time as an empathic person is not easy. In fact, you might say it's the hardest path you can choose. So I think that those of us who came to be healers, to lead, to really step into powerfully leading by example from a divine perspective, I think we agreed to take that on. And I've never met anyone from our tribe, let's say, who did not have an incredibly difficult childhood in one way or another. And I think that really serves to enhance those gifts. And in retrospect, I'm grateful for it. That was a terrible experience. I'm so glad I had it, because if I hadn't, I certainly would not be sitting here talking to you about any of this. Honestly, I'd probably be dead. That's certainly the path I was on. So I think it's available if people are willing to do the work. But I do think that some of us come in fully intending to embrace that, no matter what it ends up putting us through, however painful that may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I was thinking that there's been so much in the last, 5 years or so, connecting this empath narcissist, or exploring the empath narcissist connection, and really taking the idea of being empathic and tying it into this other psychological dynamic, that it's almost difficult to just talk about being empathic, being intuitive, or being psychic, however it's phrased, I've noticed there's some sort of shift in the way that we talk about this. And by connecting it, it's interesting, Natalie, that you brought this point up, because by connecting empath with narcissist, it's almost, it's sublimating. I don't know what's the word for it. It's making it secondary. It's making being an empath secondary to this larger problem of narcissism, and kind of connected it into, well, you developed this trait to cope with this troubling upbringing or a troubling situation when you were young. And I think that's very important. And that's definitely the case for many, that it is a coping strategy, and it's very important to understand that dynamic. But beyond that, there is another way to think about being an empath that we need to talk about as well. And I feel like we're talking about both, but this whole idea of how do you protect those special abilities that you have come in with, right? And part of what you're supposed to do on Earth is to, I mean, in my belief system, I'm sitting here proclaiming as if it's just the way it is, but that we're here in a physical realm to learn how to use these skills, whatever we're born with, with the boundaries of this world. So the more we can think of strategies for how do you use your intuition while leaf blowers are going outside, or how do you focus on your own truth and go towards your own work. But we also talk about, so we're talking about this troubling childhood and how it helps develop empaths. But Brianna, you have your own children who are developing these gifts, and I think it's important for us to think of ways to help foster these sorts of traits in our children when we have healthy homes, right? So how does that work? Or do you have to go and scare them every so often to make sure they develop these traits? Because I don't think that's the case. So there is another model that we don't talk about as much.
I count my blessings every day that my boys chose me to be their mom, just because they're such extraordinary beings. But it's so wonderful that they're in a house with parents who recognize and understand these gifts and support their development, rather than trying to squash them out of some fear-based notion that they're evil. Because, of course, as we know, it's quite the opposite. So we talk very openly with our boys about all of this. In fact, it's a large topic of conversation every day. They have no idea that in many households that would be considered unusual. So my little Max, he is still clairaudient. So we ask him what he's heard that day and what it means to him. My middle son is an amazing reader of energy, just incredible. And he's a projector in human design. So he just absorbs everything. So I have to talk to him because he just gets really mad and explodes, my poor baby. So we really have to talk through what he's taken on from other people that day and what he feels like people are not expressing or being honest about. My eldest is also an incredible reader of energy, and he seems to see auras in color like I do. And he is psychic as well. So we work on it. We talk about our visions versus our dreams. We have conversations about energies that we've picked up throughout the day. And for him, especially because he's emotionally defined. So we frequently have to talk about whether the feelings that are overwhelming him are actually his, or whether maybe they could be coming from somebody else. So we're working on helping him decipher that, because that made me crazy for a lot of years. I thought everything I was feeling was mine, and most of it wasn't at all. I'm emotionally undefined. So a lot of it, like I was picking up my mother's sadness my whole childhood and my father's rage my whole childhood. So we talk very openly with the boys, and also about our respective gifts, my husband's and mine. And they're very clear that we were put together for a reason, the five of us, and that our designs are complementary most of the time. Looking at you, my two youngest children. But we talk a lot about how our gifts can support each other, where we might need to work on things. And the first thing they do every morning upon waking is take a shower to get all that energy from overnight off of them. And then at the breakfast table, we talk about our dreams and visions and what's come up the night before. And then when they get home from school, first thing we do, take a shower, get all that energy off. And it transforms them because they come home dripping with the day, with other people's stuff all over them, and they're not themselves. And we talk about that often so that they're hopefully by now really starting to identify. In fact, I know they are, because they'll say, my eldest will say, Mom, I need to take a shower, or I need some alone time because I'm really feeling the sadness of this person in my life, or this happened earlier and I can't shake it off. I need to eat something and take a nap. Because we're really trying to teach them to recognize their own needs in relation to their own gifts and how to support and take care of themselves for the day that we're not here to do that. And then there are the times where I fall flat on my face as a mom and screw up and project something onto my kids, and they have to check me, which I really appreciate. So they're helping me as much as I'm helping them. So anyway, we do our best to make this a team effort, but we talk about it every single day.
And your eldest is Eric, who I adore, and he gives the best hugs. I haven't seen him in a while, and I think about his hugs and think it's time. But he's a manifester as well. So not only if he's picking up on people's energy, just as a manifester, you need time alone. And the fact that you talk about showers in the morning, showers at night, I've always had people say to me, "What, you don't need to shower twice a day. You don't need to do this. You don't need to do that." And there are people that even if I've been out somewhere and it's late and I'm exhausted and I get home, I will always shower before bed. And if for some reason I don't make it to bed, I'll fall asleep on the couch and sleep for 2 hours, then get up and have a shower and then go to bed. And people think it's bizarre. And it was only in the last 2 years that I figured it out, because I couldn't explain to people why I did it, but I couldn't sleep unless I showered before bed. And that shower could happen at 6 p.m. and I go to bed at midnight, but the shower has to be once I'm not seeing anybody else and I'm not going out into the world. It's once I get home into my space, I can shower and then I'm good. I can go to bed whenever I'm ready. And in the last couple of years, I finally figured it out. It was my way of cleansing all that energy. It was one day when I was standing under the shower with my face under the water and everything was flowing. And I don't know why I got the answer as to why I do what I've done my entire life. So I love that your boys do it. And not only that, but recognize why they're doing it. Whereas for me, I grew up in a household where, in fairness, there was trauma for me, but I've done so much reading on narcissists and I've dated a narcissist, but my mother wasn't one. My trauma didn't come from any of that. It was a different sort of situation that was going on. But the one thing my mother did was bring a lot of spiritual people into the house. So we were guided in a lot of ways. I've spoken very openly about the fact that the one thing she didn't discover in her life was human design. And being a manifester, I understand that as children, we are very challenging, because it's almost like we're adults in children's bodies and we're trying to go and do our own thing. And it's not always appropriate. It's not always safe, but also people around us don't always understand why we're doing what we're doing. And the fact that you are not only spiritual and allow your children to talk about their gifts and discuss all of these things, that you know their human design and understand it. Because we have had very at length discussions about this whole thing. How does that affect your parenting style when things are going on and when things are more challenging? Does the understanding of their human design and also yours mixing in with it help you parenting them and understanding it? Or I don't know what the or is, or no.
100%. My goodness, parenting is already such a challenge. Yeah, assuming one is fully invested in trying to do the best they can. It's difficult, right? You already have your own trauma to deal with. Then you have these little beings who have their own separate journeys that have little to do with you. And so even before we really dealt with our trauma and then got into human design and that understanding, we were always trying not to get in their way. It's a difficult line to walk, supporting and loving and guiding your kids without projecting your own shortcomings or beliefs or what have you onto them. So understanding human design has been such a gift. And I could actually talk about this one for hours, but just in a quick example. So my middle boy, that sweet kid, this is the one that won't wear pants, won't sit, won't do anything he's not interested in doing, including things like brushing his teeth. It was such a struggle from day one. And the funny part is, Eric, and you know my children. So Eric is so angelic, right? He was such an easy baby. And Joe and I thought, oh, we're good at this. And then we had Jack. We're like, and it had nothing to do with us. And my Jack is amazing. He's a big personality and difficult because the fact that one should do something is not a reason for him. He just doesn't care. So when I understood that he's a 1-3 projector, and once Joe and I really got what that meant, we thought, okay, so he really does have to get his needs met. He has to come first because his ego will never understand why I might address his younger brother's question before him. Because, in my mind, before I understood this, and I don't even know why I believed this, but you address the baby first. Like if the littlest one needs something, that's where I would go. But that can't happen in my house because Jack's a 1-3 and Max is a 3-5. So in the ego hierarchy, Max has to wait sometimes because Jack cannot handle not getting the attention he needs the second he needs it. And so whereas these things used to drive me crazy, and he only has 2 volumes, Loud and Louder. And again, I'm ragging on him a bit, but he's my precious boy. I love these guys so much. Now I understand that that's just the way he is. It's always going to be the way he is. And his brother, now we've explained that to his brothers, and they're starting to get that too. And of course, we all have our version of this. So Eric is a 6-2, and I'm a 6-3. So we share the role model line. So he and I can strongly relate on our feelings about how we appear and have to show up for other people, whereas Jack does not give a rat's patootie how he shows up for other people. And Max is only interested in running the universe, and God help you if you get in his way. He's a manifesting generator. So it's been so helpful because things that I would have either taken personally because of my own experience or misinterpreted because of my own limiting beliefs, now I can set those aside and say, okay, this has nothing to do with me or what I do or don't believe. It is what it is. This is his reality. And as his mom, who loves him to the ends of the earth and wants to support him, even if it may not be a choice I made for myself, it helps me show up for them the way they need me to show up for them, and not in the way I necessarily would have instinctively showed up or been comfortable showing up.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. I wish that I'd had human design or known about it when my children were small, because it's so useful. And I'm very grateful.
Your kids? What are your kids?
My son is a pure generator like I am, and I don't remember which type, but I'm also a 1-3. And as a generator, I think he's a 6-line something, or maybe I'm a 3-1. I always mix it up. My daughter is a 5-1 manifesting generator, or 1-5.
Oh.
Never remember. I get the numbers always switched around, but and I've talked about this before, that my mom is a manifester, and I feel like, actually finding out my kids' human design also made so much sense, because I learned from my mom to give space to the children, right? To let them develop who they are. And I loved that, and that's what she appreciated when she was younger. And I appreciated it on a lot of levels, but also kind of felt ignored a lot of the time, which I think that I understood better when I realized I'm a generator and she's a manifester. And We just have different energy levels. But I was happy. I was happy that I had where I put my foot down in raising my children at certain times with let's just let this child do their own thing and let's wait and see what they want or what comes from them. It's really hard because most people learn, and parenting is one of the most micromanaged things in our society, where it's a miracle anybody ever was raised and survived before the advent of books, because there's so many books and so many people out there telling you what you should do to raise your children, or medical advice telling you what you need to do at which stage for your child, that trying to do what works best for your kids is going against so much social conditioning that it's really difficult. So I think human design has helped on that level, but also it helps to understand who your parents are, so that you can really work through a lot of therapy, probably just by understanding, oh, that's why my parent did this, wanted me to do that all the time, or was always interrupting me. That's part of my experience with another parent. So I don't know. What did you ask originally, Natalie, or what did I just decide to go off on this tangent?
Well, no, you were going to ask a question and then I rudely interrupted and asked what your children were in human
Oh,
design because
yes.
I didn't know. But did you have a
Yeah.
question?
I think, I don't know. I was going to ask about I was just wanting to bring up the other side of this by looking at parents, that it's also useful to try to understand what your parents were up to, right?
It's so funny. Once we started really looking into human design, and Joe and I both had difficult childhoods. He's been very open about his as well. And we both had a rough time with our parents specifically. And when we started running the design of our families, we were both amused and slightly horrified to find out that I am the design of his mom and he's the design of my mom. And so, you can't make this stuff up, right? The universe is like, here you go. Figure it out. All your stuff. But it's been so helpful in terms of our relationships with our parents, and not necessarily in the physical world. Mine don't even speak to me anymore. But in resolving any latent feelings I had about them or for them that were really coming from the fact that we are who we are, right? Our designs clash in certain ways. And it's even tougher if you don't understand your own design, right? So there were so many things that I took personally as attacks or failures, et cetera, that really were quite inevitable as a result of having certain people in a household together. And so then when you add the empath layer on top of that, and the emotional intelligence that's developed from living in an abusive house, and the sensitivity that tends to come along with that, that's quite an explosive recipe for disaster if you haven't dealt with your trauma. So I am endlessly grateful for the human design technology, because almost without exception, when something goes wrong or doesn't feel right, or I have a nasty reaction to something, if I sit with it and get a little distance, I will eventually recognize that there's something going on with the design and there's a reason that I'm triggered, and it's my own stuff almost always.
Well, when I learned about human design, one of the things that's always gotten me through my life, I don't think I've ever been a nasty person. I don't come from a place of wanting to hurt another human being. But through this life, I have met people or not met people, and they hate me. They viscerally hate me. And one of the people that is like that is one of my sisters. We haven't spoken in many, many years. And I have asked every single person in our lives combined what her issue with me is, and nobody could ever give me an answer. I would get these random reasons that made no sense, and I would explain that it makes no sense. And again, I understand that as a manifester, I was a difficult child to raise. I didn't do anything the way I was meant to do. And if they tried to force me down a path that didn't feel right to me, I would fight back the entire way. And if they got me down that path, I would go kicking and screaming and making as much noise as you can possibly imagine. Or I would just go, okay, and then go off and do whatever it was I wanted to do anyway. And as a child, you don't recognize how difficult that is for the people raising you, the people that are in the same house as you. When I learned about human design, and so I think in 2021, Anne had said to me, you know, what's your design? And I said, I don't know. And so somebody ran my chart, and we were at the High Vibe Studios, and I then knew I was a manifester and did nothing with it, didn't understand. And eventually I got books and I started watching videos and I learned about it. One of the big things for me as a manifester was I learned that our closed and repelling aura means some people just don't like you. They don't like you energetically, and that's what it is. And I remember thinking, that's why people meet me and go, I thought you were such a bitch. And I would say, we've never spoken. And they would say, yeah, but just the way you looked. And I went, okay. And obviously, those people, we got past the, I think you're a bitch and you're actually really sweet and I really enjoy you and we can have this sort of conversation. But I look back to my childhood, and like you, I'm grateful for the childhood that I had. It was difficult, but it made me into the person that I am now. And even my abusive relationship that came many years later, I'm grateful for it. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but it changed who I am fundamentally. And I think it put me on the path that I needed to be on. But that relationship with my sister, I look at it and I don't hold any resentment to her. I don't understand what her problem is, but I'm not giving it energy anymore. But I understand that just in terms of human design, energetically in this life, this is what our relationship is meant to be. And it allows me to move on without any anger and all, I guess, with an understanding of who she is and where she is. I can't run her astrological chart because I don't know her time of birth. But everyone that I meet now, I start in my head trying to figure out astrologically what sign they are and what their human design is, because it gives me so much clarity as to how to navigate that relationship.
Sorry, I had muted because I had some noise going on here between the cats and the dogs. Juliet has run into the room, Natalie.
Oh, my girlfriend.
Yes. I wonder if I could move us to an issue that came up early, or a question I had earlier in our conversation. Hopefully that's okay, right?
Of course.
So
no, you can't ask any questions,
I'm
Anne.
a Libra. I have to ask you permission, especially with the Aries in the room. So, okay, Natalie told me all about your trip to New Orleans, and you know that one of the things that she talked about was that how she used your services to just give you pictures of this person and that person and have you do readings. But I'm wondering about how you experience a really old city like this that's had all sorts of crazy history. And I guess I'm wanting to know how you deal with those sorts of areas where there may be a lot of spirits, or what your thoughts are on that, and how you know when there is another energy in the room with you.
I'm so glad you asked, because I have not been able to be quiet since we got back from this trip. First of all, we had a ridiculously good time. Just so much fun. I think I woke up for 3 weeks after thinking, I wish I was still in New Orleans with Natalie.
I second that.
We must go again.
Yes.
But I fell madly in love with New Orleans. And it's strange that it took me so long to get there, because it's one of those places where lifelong I have felt compelled to go there. I felt a connection, but didn't really know why. And I had 3 other trips in my life that were planned and then were derailed at the last minute for some reason or another. And one of them was Katrina. So I almost felt like the universe had been keeping me away for some reason for a while. And then when we were there, it almost felt like being home. I was just madly, madly in love with this city. At one point, we took this amazing walking tour through the Garden District, which is mostly very old, lovely mansions, very well established, lots of ghosts, lots of cemeteries. But at one point, there was a house that I am absolutely certain is my house. I wanted to walk in there and move the furniture. And Natalie was like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "No, that's my house, my house." And apparently, Sandra Bullock owns it right now. So I'm going to have to speak to her because this is my house. But I was having memories of my children and my life there, and I was seeing it. But anyway, to get back to the actual question. So I've been blessed to travel a lot to many places, and I almost always have a very intense response to a city, just like I do to people. My gut either says yes or no, and that's that. Um, Before I did the work to really strip away the traumatic experiences I had had, a city would be able to trigger me, just like a person would be able to trigger me. If it had the frequency, especially of sexual abuse, that kind of trauma, domestic trauma, it would really trigger me and I would have an intense response and it would make me really vulnerable to whatever spirit activity was there. Because they're everywhere, right? Ghosts are everywhere, spirits are everywhere. Even humans carry them. When I met my husband, he had an entity attached to him, and it was there for about 15 years until he did. We've done similar types of transmutation work, and it didn't leave him until he did that work and released this thing. So I feel like we're always living with ghosts. So I was very vulnerable once upon a time, but now on the other side of really doing that deep soul level work, it doesn't trigger me anymore. But I will absolutely notice it, and I'll either vibe with it or I won't. So usually what happens is these days I'll show up to a new place and I'll take it all in and experience it and have some feelings about it. But 90% of the time, I stash it away in my little mental book of experiences and move on. But about 10% of the time, I'll have a really strong reaction, and I'll feel like a relationship is being reignited for some purpose. It happened in Egypt, and that one I write about extensively in my book. Definitely happened in New Orleans. I actually, poor Natalie, I made her listen to things as they were coming up, and I was remembering. I think I've lived there multiple times, but at least one of them has been fleshed out very clearly in my mind since our trip. I was a jazz singer there. I think in the 1920s, and that was a different set of memories from this house that I'm quite certain is mine and hope I get to buy again someday. So something about that city really, it brought so much back to me. And boy, I could go on and on. So I won't make you listen to the reasons, but there was a specific set of memories and emotions that came up for me as a result of that trip that directly correlate with something I'm dealing with right now in this life that I needed to clear to move forward on my current path. So for me, when I travel, that's usually what's going on these days. Is I feel like my guides use it as an opportunity for me to clear batches of old trauma that are somehow impeding my ability to really step into my light and be of service in this life. But there are places that I had gone prior to dealing with the trauma that I swore I'd never go back to because the experience was so turbulent and I could feel so many of the suffering souls around me that were still there that I never, ever wanted to return. The Dominican Republic was one such place. And I'd be curious to go back now on the other side of dealing with the trauma. But that was the one vacation that Joe and I ended up leaving early because the experience of being there was making me physically ill. Not for any reason I could see. I felt so much darkness and so much suffering. I couldn't be there anymore.
See, I know in my last past life, I died in the Holocaust. I've done regression, hypnosis on it, and they took me to my death. and they had to bring me out of it because I was choking. And I haven't been to Germany yet. I haven't been to Auschwitz. Whenever I go to any Holocaust museum, there is a connection to a lot of these places, the photographs, the belongings, all of that. So I've had that feeling. I don't know how I would go in Germany. And I've certainly been to places that, not that it's that traumatic that I have to leave, but that I get somewhere. And Mount Shasta was one. I thought I would go to Mount Shasta and just love it. I love Sedona and I get excited whenever there's a vortex somewhere. We went to Mount Shasta. If I could have left immediately, I would have left. I just hated the energy of that place. And I know David from High Vibe feels a similar way to how I feel. He doesn't love Shasta and he's been very vocal about it. And there are people that go and adore it. And my sister had a wonderful time, which was great. But for me, a connection always happens in Hawaii. There is something about the islands. I am positive I've had multiple lives there. I watch hula dancing, no matter whether it's Tahitian, Hawaiian, whatever island nation they're from, and I cry. It's like I'm home again. But while you were talking, because you had such an incredible reaction when we did that walking tour, and you said immediately, that's my house. And I'm like, okay. And I get that connection because I've had it for other places. But I did your astrocartography, and I don't know enough about this. And Anne and I are trying to get someone who really has the knowledge of astrocartography, but running, because your chart was up, you have Saturn and Jupiter running through Louisiana for you. And from my understanding, Jupiter is one of the places where if you've got that line, it's one of your cities, essentially.
Wow.
So I found that really interesting and just thought I would bring that up. The other thing is we did do a ghost tour, which was different to what you and I both expected. And we didn't go into any of these places. There is a ghost we want to have dinner with when we eventually go back there one day. But I had a reaction to the it's owned by the Catholic Church, but I don't think it's actually a monastery or anything like that. It was where the casket girls or the coffin girls were, and you were okay there, but you had a reaction to the final stop, which was a property that was owned by Nicolas Cage. Exactly. You're getting it even now. And you had a reaction there. And that was really interesting to me, that we both picked up on the energies in different places, which were part of the same tour. And thankfully, we didn't step foot in any of the actual properties.
Yes, that was so intense. I wish I could remember the name of the place you're talking about, but that was so amazing. You were telling us stories about the origin of vampire lore and these terrible casket brides. But I remember I was just looking on with fascination, and then I noticed poor Natalie is having this visceral reaction. And then, yeah, we wandered down the street. It was Madam something. I can't remember who had originally owned this house of horrors where they had done terrible, terrible experiments on the people who lived there. But it felt like someone was squeezing my intestines and wringing them out, and I had to move away from the house. And we were across the street to begin with. It's not like we were in the foyer, but I had to get away from it. So it makes me wonder what our respective experiences have been where we were triggered by these different things. It's fascinating.
I'm looking up Nicolas Cage properties.
Yeah, I just looked it up.
Oh,
it's
good,
the LaLaurie house. And then the convent is the old Ursuline convent.
Yeah.
That I think you also talked about. Because I remember those two locations as well from when I finally got to go to New Orleans. I don't know how to say it. But yes, that house, how Nicolas Cage could have lived there.
Well, no one over there likes him. So when they talk about who he is and how he treated people, it kind of makes sense that he was attracted to that property. Although they said that once he found out the history of the property and what was going on there, he never spent another night. But whether that's because of that or his taxation issues, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But you walk through the French Quarter there and you walk through the Garden District, you can feel, it reminded me almost of being in Paris. I remember being 21 and in Paris, and I called my dad and I said, you can feel the history seeping out of the cobblestones and the buildings. Like I could feel the souls there and I could feel their stories. And this was before I talked as openly about the things that I get. But again, it had never sort of been shut down for me as a child, but it also wasn't anything I was stepping into. And New Orleans felt very similar to me in terms of feeling the history pour out of things, whereas I don't get that as I walk through Los Angeles. Certain areas of LA and certain homes certainly, but not the city itself, whereas New Orleans, you really felt it.
It's so interesting you say that, because you're right. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't typically feel that weight and breadth of history in the United States. I mean, it's such a young country. I had always assumed that was the reason, but New Orleans is really the first time I felt that really on this continent at all, whereas I felt it in Europe several times. So maybe it is that the incredible combustion of cultures that created that city and the lineage that they brought with them from much older, well established, because you're so right, it felt much older than it actually is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was just, did you, because you've been, haven't you, Anne?
Yeah, and I would say that for me, the whole Southeast feels like that, and Florida as well, all around the Tallahassee area and the coast up there along the Gulf. I feel like I'm having a mystical experience all the time. Like I could easily tap into the energy there. And the history there, it makes a lot of sense because those are the earliest contact zones of different cultures coming together, and also all the first peoples of the continent. I was looking at a map of the earliest peoples in the Americas and seeing just how many were grouped around that area as well. So I think that's interesting, Brianna, that you talk about the combustion of the different cultures, because it was happening even so much earlier than European contact as well. And then the Europeans started to come into the region in the 16th century and established missions that were there longer than we've been a country. So it's such a fascinating history in that whole region. And yeah, I don't know what it is. And it's interesting too that you had that experience with the Dominican Republic, because again, it's in that whole that region of the water. So I've always wondered about it. And this is also, if you went even out further, you've got the Bermuda Triangle that we always used to hear about as kids. You don't hear about it as much now. Do you feel like there's an odd different in energy in that region at all?
Definitely. Now, part of me would like to go back in the present day with my current level of development and see what my experience is, because there's always a question of what frequency you're drawing toward you, right, in your current state. And this was many, many years ago, probably at the crux of my suffering and my own trauma. I really hadn't dealt with much yet. So it's hard to know how much that did or did not play into that experience, but it was such a dark experience. And even the things that we saw there, some of them are too horrible to recount. So I'm going to gloss over them just because I wish they weren't in my head. So I don't want to put them in yours. But the only times we left the property, because we were really encouraged when we got there to stay at the resort, which I found strange because to me, the point of traveling is to go out and meet people and experience the culture and really delve into what it's like and feel that energy. So we did go out on a couple of guided tours, day trips. I wanted to see the coffee plantations and the farms and just, really experience it. Every single time we left that resort, we would drive by horrific accidents, either car or moped accidents that had just happened. And the first time, it was so terrible. There were 3 people involved, and 2 of them were literally lying in the street. And our bus driver just kept driving. And Joe and I were like, stop. I was like, wait, he's a doctor. He's like, please pull over the bus. Let's see if we can help. And the driver ever so casually said, oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. Like, nothing to see here. And we couldn't even process that. Like, what now? And he wouldn't stop. He just kept driving. And this happened several more times that day. But one of the things we saw was so horrific. I wish I could unsee it. But what struck me most is we had driven by, it was clearly the very, very recent aftermath of this tragedy. And there was a circle of people that had formed around this poor deceased person. And the strangest thing is that no one was reacting at all. The circle of people was silent. No one was crying. No one was helping. No one was even moving. It's as if they were suffering this collective shock where they had experienced so much trauma, they could not react to the death of somebody they loved. It was a very young person, too. And for some reason, that shook me to my core, and it brought up, I don't have clear memories. I'm not sure if I actually lived there or if I just passed through. I almost feel like I was brought through there, but not of my own volition. I don't quite know what to make of that, but whatever my experience with that place, it was very, very dark. Oh, there's a kitty behind you.
That's Juliet.
Yeah, that's Juliet. She's been roaming around here. I hope that I don't know what she's doing back there, but we'll keep an eye on her.
But anyway, so it's hard for me to know if the experience of the land itself is different because it's holding that energy of tragedy and trauma. I mean, I'm sure it most certainly is to some degree, but I don't know how much of it is the land itself and how much of it is me and my experience with the land, my memories, and the frequencies I was running at the time and what they were drawing toward me. So I'd be real curious to see if I were to go back today, would I have anything like that experience, or would it be sunshine and rainbows? Who knows?
If you make it back, you'll have to come back and let us know what the difference is, if there is a difference. Now, I don't want to end this conversation, but we promised you that we would let you go because your boys are about to come home. But before we do that, Anne and I have 4 questions that we ask everybody at the end of our show. So I'll kick us off. What makes you laugh?
Oh my goodness, my boys, first and foremost. Everything they do makes me laugh. They're precious. And the more work I do on myself, and the more I'm able to view the world and everything that's happening from a perspective of neutrality, which is not perfect. I work on this every day, but when I'm actually able to get there, and then I'm able to see events that would once have struck me as horribly tragic or depressing or needless, I see them differently now. And sometimes the pieces fit together so perfectly in the context of what I know is unfolding for us as a collective consciousness that it makes me laugh. And I'm so grateful, because before it used to make me cry. But I feel like now I'm starting to get the bigger picture.
Wow, I love that answer. So then question number 2 is, who was or is your biggest spiritual influence?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That is a tie between my amazing husband and my amazing friend Christopher. And part of the reason is the 3 of us have been around many, many times together. So in a way, we are a family. But they have both been incredibly significant and impactful in my personal spiritual growth. And I think they always will be, because I've had people who have come into my life for a brief moment, had a big impact, and left. But I can tell these 2 are lifers, and thank goodness for that. I'm not letting them go.
And I giggled when I was looking at which questions I was asking you versus which ones Anne were asking you, because this is ironic considering the title of your husband's book, which I didn't think to bring over with me. I just brought yours over. But what would your advice be to people on how to transcend fear?
Well, I've come to believe it is not possible to truly transcend fear without dealing with the underlying experiences and trauma that make you susceptible to it. Because fear is as ever present as love, right? It's a very powerful force. That's why it's so often used against us. So at least in my personal experience, the way I transcended all of my fear, of which there was plenty, was by really getting in and stripping away the layers of trauma that were keeping me locked into these beliefs. Things I think most of us carry stories like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't deserve X, Y, or Z. Someone else should really handle that because I'm not capable. We have all these stories. So it's really about stripping away the emotional charges and the trauma surrounding the experiences that created those beliefs. And then by extension, the fear magically dissolves. It happens all on its own. So it's really about getting in there, doing the work to deal with your trauma.
Okay, so then what's the best piece of spiritual advice that you've ever been given?
Oh man, that's a tough one. There's so much. If I had to narrow it down, can I have two?
Yes.
So one is early in the pandemic, I was working at an institution remotely that I once had a great deal of respect for. But unfortunately, like so many of us, as the pandemic started to unfold, this institution jumped hardcore on the destructive narratives of control and obfuscation and manipulation. And increasingly, I was feeling like I did not belong there. And it was starting to really exhaust me to be there at all, even though I was completely remote at this point. I had a new baby and I never even went onto campus. And I loved the work I was doing, but I felt like I don't want to participate in this narrative and pouring energy into what I see as very destructive narrative. And Christopher said to me, he said, you have to remember that one drop of black paint can turn an entire can of white paint gray. He said, what if your energy is the reason they're not going further off the deep end? What if your presence is actually giving others the courage to adhere to their beliefs or limiting the extent of their tyranny or what have you? And that really affected me. And though I ultimately ended up leaving, I don't think it was for another year. That really kept me around. But I think about that lesson a lot. Like when we find ourselves a place that doesn't feel like it's a good fit or isn't constructive, is it possible that our presence there is actually of service to others? Like what, because I think I was looking at it as, what am I getting out of this? But in that particular instance, it was actually about, what am I supposed to be giving? How am I supposed to be being of service here? And the other one is a really simple thing, but it affected me very deeply. Actually the same someone, this is Christopher. When I was really struggling early on when I first met him and my whole life was falling apart, he said, and I'm not going to get the words right because I remember the lesson, not the words verbatim in this case, but he essentially told me that the world and all of humanity needs me to be exactly who I really am. So not the contrived version of myself, not the version my parents wanted me to be, not what society would like me to be, but who I really truly am at a soul level, because only I can offer what my soul can offer, right? And that's true of every single person on the planet. So when I look around and I see so much conformity, right? So much assimilation, I want to give everyone a hug and tell them that's not what we need from you. We need you to be who you really are at a soul level, because each of us has gifts that only we can give. And at the end of the day, from the perspective of oneness consciousness, the only way we get through this is together. Right? We all have a piece of the puzzle. So we really need everyone to show up beautifully and powerfully as who they really are.
Now that is spoken like a true Aquarius rising, I have to say. And more on that in our next show.
Absolutely. So I would like to thank you, Anne, for doing this with me every time that we have an episode of Gemini Rising. Brianna, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us for this conversation. For anyone that hasn't already read this book, Emerging from Darkness, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. I read it, I think, in one sitting. And anybody that wants to know more about Brianna or follow her, I'll have all of her links in the description below. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that to catch future episodes. And also, if you want to watch any of our previous conversations with Brianna, there's 2 of them on my main page on YouTube. And of course, if you go to highvibe.tv, there is the episode of The Golden Thread that we had Brianna on, and that was a phenomenal conversation. So make sure you get onto all of that. Thank you so much for joining us. We love having everybody live in the chat. And thank you to everyone that is watching this after the fact. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.